the Israelites, they start getting a little whiny about, well, yeah, we didn't want to be slaves, but now we're hungry, we're thirsty, we're not sure about our security, where are we going to live? I mean, you can imagine. It's kind of like, kids at Disney World after a morning and lunch, and then now it's afternoon time. And an interesting thing happens. God uses Moses' Holy Spirit-powered magic staff to smack a rock, and then water comes out. So just one more thing that God does. But the point that I want to bring out as we begin this next section, because we're really exiting the Egyptian phase and we're moving in, you can kind of see the picture of that's allegedly Moses there, and the Israelites following after him with some wagons and people and things. Many of us ask things of God, right? In fact, probably would it be safe to say all of us ask things of God. And we believe that if the Lord will grant our requests, we will find peace or happiness or security or something to sustain us that we need, or we'll find, whatever it is that's in your heart. And I think there's an unspoken belief in that once those things have been given to us, or if the Lord grants our request, then we will be content with that. And then we will live happily ever after in our Christian walk. And allegedly what happens, you know the story in our lives, and almost every Bible story we ever read, that once we get the thing that we ask the Lord for, now we're just wanting more things. Sometimes though, we end up not wanting what we ask for. All right, and that's where I want us to think about that a little bit. Think about why that happens. How is it that we can want something from the Lord so bad and then end up regretting that request? I can remember when I was about 20 years old, I was a youth minister, youth pastor, and Stephanie and I were young. Well, she's still young, but I kind of walked into that one mistakenly. But anyway, at that time, about 1998 or 9, I was in a small church of, maybe about our size, maybe a little bit bigger, rural church up in Willard. And I always thought to myself, we had about, maybe 8 or 9 students in our youth group, maybe 10. And I always thought, wow, how cool would it be to have like 50 or 60 or 70 kids in the youth group? It would just be so great. In fact, I felt like all my problems would be solved if I just, had a huge youth group. All right, it would just be amazing. Think about all those young people listening to my amazing, youth messages and lives being changed, and them growing up and graduating high school and becoming missionaries and pastors and deaconesses and whatever, and changing the world. Okay, I just thought that was going to be amazing. So about a year or two later, the Lord granted my request. And I had a friend who was leaving a sister church that ran about 1,000 people, and they had a youth group of about 90 to 100. And shockingly enough, they called me to be their youth pastor. And I also led worship at that church as well. So I went and thinking, man, this is it. I'm like 21 years old, and I've hit the jackpot. I'm going to be like Billy Graham by the time I'm 40. Well, didn't quite make that one. But anyway, and so went into that adventure. Well, it ended up being one of the worst years of my life. It was absolutely miserable. I had dozens of parents that hated everything I did. There was kids everywhere going nuts at all times, and it didn't matter how many adult workers we had. It seemed like there was always chaos. We went on one mission trip and one like choir tour to Texas. And I mean, it was just one nightmare after another. And finally, at the end of that year, is I was kind of on this big evangelism trek, and I was in the Methodist church at that time, and so not that there's anything wrong with Methodists, they're just not particularly evangelistic, and so they really would rather, I think, have had kind of a youth babysitting service than a empowering students to do something. And that, coupled with my complete lack of any kind of administrative skills whatsoever, basically ended up with a, hey, we really love you, but we would love you to be at another church kind of conversation. And so that was the end of my 1 year of fame and glory. And what I learned from that experience is that not everything that I want from the Lord, and even the things that He grants, may end up being happy with in the end. Because it was a long, hard year. Now, I did learn a lot of lessons. Failure is the great teacher, and that God kind of used that situation to bring me to Jefferson Avenue, where I met a number of you guys, and then ultimately, which led us to plant Life's Journey. But so I think that was part of God's plan, but it definitely changed my worldview a little bit on asking things from God and thinking, that I know best. And really, in all reality, if you think about the ridiculousness of that, of each of us thinking that we know what's best, and so we go to the Lord, Lord, I need $10,000, or I really want this job, or I really want this house over here, or I really want this car. And so we're always thinking to ourselves that this is what will be best. But how often do we find that if God grants that to us, then in fact we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. And so the Israelites, going on for centuries, we want to be free, we don't want to be slaves anymore, we want to govern ourselves and so on and so forth, provide for ourselves. Now they are out in the wilderness, and that very thing is happening, and they are starting to question whether or not that was what they really wanted. And so let's read about this together. Beginning in verse 8, their troubles multiply. At Rephidim, Amalek came and fought against Israel. And Moses said to Joshua, select some men for us and go fight against Amalek. All right, so these are the Amalekites, or Amalek is a nation. And the Israelites have kind of wandered too close to their territory, and so they are attacking their camp. Now, of course, it's not like you got 10 guys and you can go hide in the forest, okay? You've got a civilization of nomads, and they have women and children and all their belongings and possessions with them, and of course all the gold and silver, which I'm sure the Amalekites have figured out that they have, and they're about to get robbed and overtaken. So Moses meets with Joshua, who we'll later find out he kind of becomes the big warrior soldier guy, and he says, take some men and go fight. In other words, gather an army, and we've got to defend ourselves against the Amalekites. So they're just now left one tough situation, and they're already in another situation. And it says, Joshua did as Moses had told him, and they fought against Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And while Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed. But whenever he put his hand down, Amalek prevailed. All right, so this one's kind of a no-brainer. You basically need to hold your hands up and not let them down, because people start getting killed when you let your hands down. So it says Moses' hands grew heavy, and they took a stone and they put it under him so that he could sit down. Then Aaron and Hur supported his hands, all right, so one on each side of him, supported his hands, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until the sun went down. And so Joshua defeated Amalek and his army with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this down on a scroll as a reminder and recite it to Joshua, and I will completely blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. Now that all kind of happened fast for us, but for them it didn't. There was a lot that happened during the course of that battle. The bottom line is, God knew they were going to get attacked. He had a plan. They were victorious, and they went on. But we don't ever live in the past or the future, do we? It's the one thing that humanity can't do, at least not yet anyway. We cannot go back in time. We cannot go in the future. We can only exist. Our consciousness can only exist in this moment. Whoops! No. It was that moment. No, it was this moment. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop trying to catch it, because moments keep happening, right? And I can't go back and catch that moment that's kind of run off over there somewhere while I was trying to catch it. So you get the idea. And so we find ourselves in these situations where the only way that we can exert force or exert change or have some kind of impact on our lives is in that moment. But we do carry with us the knowledge of the past and God's teaching for the future that we can take with us. Let's see what happens next. Kind of strangely, Moses' father-in-law Jethro visits, so we're going to skip past that. It's not insignificant, but we're going to move on to Mount Sinai. And after 3 months of this wandering and kind of relying on God for food and water and provisions, being attacked by foreign armies, it says on the exactly 3 months, which is the same day in the month that the Israelites had left the land of Egypt, they entered the wilderness of Sinai. All right, so if you've ever heard the phrase, or someone refer to the phrase that you're like the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. Okay, that's kind of a pun, that deals with this idea that they're going to spend 40 years in the desert / wilderness, because this topography, when we think wilderness, we think like Canadian wilderness, tall trees, lots of things to kill and eat, and vegetation. This is not the wilderness to what is being referred to here. This is more of a desert, and it's wild. There are wild animals, but you don't eat them, they eat you, okay? So it is not the kind of wilderness. You might think, oh, well, that sounds kind of nice, spend some time in the wilderness, in a log cabin, with a nice warm and cozy fireplace, and we'll set some traps and eat some rabbits. Nope, not like that, all right? Very barren, very hostile, and the thing about it is nobody lives there. But there's a reason why no one lives there, and that's because it's not really hospitable for a few people, much less an entire civilization of people. So it says they departed Rephidim, that's where they were attacked by the Amalekites, and they entered the wilderness of Sinai, and they camped in the wilderness. And Israel camped there in front of the mountain. And Moses went up to the mountain to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, "This is what you must say to the house of Jacob." And he explained to the Israelites, "You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now if you will listen to me and carefully keep my covenant, you will be my own possession. And out of all the peoples, although all the earth is mine, you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. And these are the words that you are to say to the Israelites." Now, I think there's really two streams of thought happening. There's first of all, or I don't know that thought's the right word, there are two sagas that are in play. Okay, for the common person who's been a slave and now they're free, this is a crazy upheaval of life. Okay, because on the one hand, you've left being a slave, so now you're free. You're not under the Egyptian whip. You're not being mistreated by them, and you're going to form your own country, your own civilization with your people. All right, so that's good. The bad thing is now you're worrying about where your next meal is going to come from. You're worrying about safety. You've already been attacked once by some foreign nation. You're worried about how your kids are going to grow up. You're worried about where you're finally going to, are you going to find a place? I mean, they didn't for 3 months. That's why they're in the wilderness. And so you're probably feeling a little depressed right now, thinking, well, man, what is going on? All right, so there's just that real, that we don't, right now, I mean, we've been fed. I mean, at least if you ate lunch, maybe you didn't, but you ate breakfast. We've been kind of fed. It's generally warm, and that's pretty comfortable in here. It's not raining on us, or there's not wild animals around us, or some savage peoples that are going to kill us around the corner. So we're feeling pretty comfortable, and so that's our context as we read about what's happening. But that's not their context at all. All right, they're living this. They're living it in the moment, like we talked about. But God has a whole different saga. All right, it's not that He's not thinking about that. But what He's thinking about is what is the plan? What is the purpose? And the purpose is God is creating a new nation, a people that will be His people. And He's going to give them a law. All right, we talked about a covenant. He said, keep my covenant. And so, in other words, that's the law that He's going to give them. And He is going to gather these people together, and He's going to protect them. He's going to keep them safe. He's going to make sure that they prosper as a nation. He's going to make sure that everything goes well with them. All right? And here's the thing. That's not a secret. He told them that. He told Moses that. Moses told the people that. It was prophesied, all right, that God was going to create a nation. He even told Abraham that. So this is no secret, all right? But what is the general sense, or what is the general feeling? We're afraid, we're tired, we're hungry, we're uncertain, all right? And I find it amazingly similar to how we live our life most of the time, right? Tired, hungry, wanting more, feeling like we're, one job shy or $1 shy of happiness, all right? Always worrying about, well, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And so the saga continues, all these thousands of years later. To where He's said the same thing from the beginning. He said, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to give you what you need. I'm going to make sure that you're safe. Now, does that mean that everything is always going to be okay? No, it doesn't mean that at all. There's going to be problems. There's going to be struggles. But ultimately, even if everything in this whole life turns out a total disaster, when we leave this reality, which is small and finite, and compared to the eternity that we're going to spend with Jesus, insignificant, and that will all go away. All right? And just as Israel will leave the wilderness, we will leave the wilderness of this life, and we will enter into a place that God dwells. And in fact, he even refers to it as a kingdom. All right? And so there's a lot of great parallels, but we've got to move on. And he said in verse 7, after Moses came back, he summoned the elders of the people, and he set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded them. And then all the people responded together, we will do all that the Lord has spoken. Okay, so let's note that, or if you're taking notes. Okay, the people said, this sounds great. We're going to do everything that God told us to do. I mean, after all, he did part the sea, he did wipe out the Egyptian army, he did wipe out the Amalekite army, he did make Moses' magical stick make water, and they're going to get manna, which they're going to get tired of, but at least it's something to eat. So they're thinking, okay, we're going to do everything that God said. All right, we will not, we'll think about it, not, if it's convenient, but no, we're going to do it all. Okay, well, let's see if they do it all. So Moses brought the people's words back to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear when I speak with you and will always believe you. In other words, he's going to give Moses some credibility. All right, so he's just kind of not out there some crazy cult leader just saying stuff, doing stuff. All right, he's going to give him credibility, or God's going to give him credibility. Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. And then he says, here's how they're going to be consecrated. They must wash their clothes, be prepared by the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of the people and put boundaries for the people all around the mountain and say, be careful that you don't go up on the mountain or touch its base. Anyone who touches the mountain will be put to death. No hand may touch him, and instead he will be stoned or shot with arrows. No animal or man will live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they may go up to the mountain. All right, so God is consecrating a place. He's going to come down to the mountain, okay? So this is kind of one of those things like, grabbing the electrical lines that run from pole to pole. Like if you do that, you are going to be killed. It's just kind of a law of physics that when you connect a positively charged line with a grounded line, then however many thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of watts is flowing through there is going to flow through your body and stop your heart and fry your brain. All right, that kind of idea, okay, because God is powerful. And that's even actually a small illustration compared to how powerful God is, but we get the idea. So it says, Moses came down from the mountain to the people, and he consecrated them. They washed their clothes, and he said to the people, be prepared by the third day. Don't get together with your wives. And then on that third day, when morning comes, when that third day came and morning was there was thunder and lightning and a thick cloud on the mountain and a loud trumpet sound, so that all the people in the camp shuddered. So it's a little scary. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was completely enveloped in smoke because the Lord came down on it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. All right, now if you're thinking about a furnace, like your furnace doesn't smoke. In fact, if your furnace smokes, that's bad. That means there's probably something wrong with it. But in this time, a furnace was basically you would take wood or maybe coal, and you would set it on fire, and you would burn it, and then the smoke, you would try to separate the smoke from the heat. But if you had a really big furnace, it would be just, and the expression is smoking hot, right? So it's going to create a lot of smoke. So that's what they're talking about when you're trying to picture that. And it says the whole mountain shook violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in the thunder. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai at the top of the mountain, and the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and he went up. The Lord directed Moses, "Go down and warn the people not to break through to see the Lord, otherwise many of them will die." Now I find that really interesting. All right, so it's not like God's coming in this prideful and arrogant way, here I am, and I'm so amazing that I'm going to smite you if you come in my presence. No, God's concerned. And he says, if people come into my presence, the sheer power of that will destroy them. So warn them. Don't. You're going to be. It's just like all of us. We're kind of like little toddlers. We always want to look out the window and see what's going on, or read all on the internet about something or somebody, and we're just curious. And we all know what curiosity did to the cat, right? Killed the cat. And so God knows that that's how people are. And so he's saying, hey, warn them, do not come up here no matter what, no matter how curious you are, do not come up here. And it says, even the priests who come near the Lord must purify themselves, or the Lord will break out in anger against them. And so Moses responded to the Lord, the people cannot come to Mount Sinai since you warned us. Put a boundary around the mountain and consider it holy. And the Lord replied to him, go down and come back with Aaron, but the priests and the people must not break through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out in anger. And so Moses went down to the people, and he told them, all right? And now you know what's going to happen next, right? The 10 Commandments. This is a pretty cool deal. And this is the beginning of something really, really important. And before we get into this, I want to make a couple comments about the 10 Commandments. There are varying ideas about how we should be governed, right? Every time we pull out our news app on our phone, or we watch the news, if you still watch the news, or we read a newspaper, we can see that there is a lot. In fact, probably not since the Civil War has there been so much disagreement about how we should be governed, right? Is the Republican ideal, where we believe that there is a rule of law and that law determines how we live. There's the Democratic ideal, which is a mob rule, basically whatever the majority says, that's the rule. There is communist rule, where you have a few people that get together and kind of rule over everybody. You have the dictatorship kind of rule, where you have like a Star Wars style emperor, and he alone decides everything. And then there's anarchy, where there is no government and it's just a free-for-all, and so, and those are just a few, right, to name a few. So there are a lot of different ideas about how we should be governed as a people. And I bring this up because not only is God giving a spiritual law, all right, to his people, to the Israelites, but he is teaching about how we are to live, how we are to be governed. And so if you were to ask, well, is there a biblical model for how we are to be governed? Yes, there is. It's rule of law, and that's what we're going to talk about in these 10 Commandments. And it says, God spoke all these words. We're now in chapter 20. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery, and do not have other gods besides me. Do not make idols for yourselves, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. Okay, so God's obviously talking about, the little figurines that people make, and he's talking about some of the religions that worship things in the sea, in the ocean, or in the stars above, or whatever. That's what he's referring to. And he says, you must not bow to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the father's sin to the 3rd and 4th generations. We'll talk about that. Of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So notice the blessing extends way past the curse. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God, because the Lord will not leave anyone unpunished who misuses his name. All right, so That's talking about taking the Lord's name in vain, right? Which we all have been guilty of at one time or another. But I want to expand our understanding of that a little bit, and I'm not going to stop and comment on every single law, but I want some of them are pretty clear. Don't murder. Okay, not a whole lot to say about that. But I want to say something about this because as I look at Christians and as I look at people today, this is one of the most misunderstood commands. To not take the Lord's name in vain, or to not, the way that my Holman Christian Standard says it, is to not misuse his name, for he will not leave anyone unpunished. In the time of the Israelites, God's name was so holy that it was not spoken. All right, and even if you look in a lot of the New Testament and Old Testament writers, they don't use God's name, Yahweh, right? They just say the Lord, or they'll say God, because his name was considered so sacred and holy that it was unacceptable to even say it, all right? And there was also this belief in ancient times that if you knew someone's name, you had kind of a special knowledge or a special power, that knowing a name or speaking a name had this special power. And so to try to speak God's name was almost like you're saying, I have power over God, all right, which obviously is completely unacceptable. So not only should we not, shout when we stub our toe, oh my G-O-D, okay, that's really the beginning of the understanding of that. But it's this idea that if we're going to mention God, if we're going to think about God, if we're going to write about God, preach about God, that it should be done in a way, not in a I don't want to sound fundamentalist or judgmental, not in a way that's, serious and we should browbeat you into observing some kind of a rule, but in a heartfelt, genuine desire to honor God in how we speak and how we live. And so when we misuse his name, it's because we're saying it, we're using it in a way that isn't honoring him. All right? And so I think that's important for us to maybe assess for ourselves. When I'm talking about God or whenever I use that word, am I doing it in a way that is respectful and honoring, and in a way that's going to communicate that respectfulness and that honor to someone else who has no idea who God is, or, other than maybe, something they saw on TV or read in a magazine. So I think it's really important for us to understand the significance of not misusing his name. All right, the next thing he says is to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And he clarifies this. He says, so you're to labor, you're to work for 6 days, and you're to get everything done. Okay, now I want to pause right there, because sometimes here's what it sounds like God's saying. Kind of do the minimum to get by for 6 days, and then kick back on the seventh day. Okay, it's not what it says. He says to do all your work. All right, so in other words, to accomplish everything that needs to be accomplished. So that means you may work some long, hard 6 days. All right, but accomplish everything. All right, don't kind of get lazy on the 6th day and work a half day and be like, well, I'll figure it out later. Get it all done. Work hard. He's not. This isn't a ticket to be lazy. All right. He's saying get all your work done, but then on the 7th day, you are to rest, and you are to. It says the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and you must not do any work. And he clarifies that not you, not your son or daughter, so your children, not your male or female slaves, or anybody who's working for you. All right. So if you own a business, then let's think about what that says. All right, I'm just going to leave it at that, so don't judge anybody. It says, for the Lord, and also your livestock, so your livestock shouldn't be working, or the foreigner who is within your gates. The Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he declared it holy. All right? Next thing, honor your father and your mother, so that you may have a long life in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Now, I know our younger kids aren't in here, so we'll have to pass that information on to them. I know they'll be excited to learn that is the case. Notice there's a lot of words that can be substituted in. Depending on what translation you have, it may say, obey your father and mother, honor. It may have another word. The idea here is not just like until you turn 17, because in Missouri, you're legally an adult at age 17. It's different in every state. And then, of course, there's when you can smoke, when you can drink, the federal, whatever. So I'm not trying to argue an age. But whatever age you feel like someone is an adult, that, all of a sudden they should respect and obey their parents, and then all of a sudden, like, a day goes by, and it's like, oh, you give your parent the middle finger, and you're out the door, okay? So there's a misunderstanding, I think, a little bit about this verse. The reason why this is because your parents have lived a much longer time. And you might say, well, my parents are idiots, and they don't know anything, but which you might actually feel that way. But here's the thing. Failure is the great teacher, right? So even if your parents were the greatest failures ever, they have had a lot of teaching in that failure. And so not everything they say is right, not everything that comes out of their mouth you should live and die by, but we should respect and honor that. And there's a greater lesson that really goes beyond that. That generally, and this is going to make me sound really old-fashioned, and I am turning 40 this year, so maybe this is why, but generally older people should be respected. We should respect an older person in general because they've lived more life. They've had more opportunities to fail. They've had more opportunities to learn from their mistakes and to learn not only knowledge, but to use that knowledge and create wisdom with it. And so the wise young person listens to an older person. Again, that doesn't mean that every older person knows everything and is always right, but there is a great lesson here. And I learned that, I'm not sure when I figured this out, I was probably in my mid to late 20s, but I figured out, you know what, stopping and listening to an older person describe something or talk about how to use a tool or talk about how to make this or that choice, my life got a whole lot better when I figured that truth out. So if you're a little bit younger here in this room and you're thinking, okay, I have to mind my parents until I, leave the house or get a certain age, and then, that attitude is probably going to cause you trouble down the line. And so I want to make some comments so that you will be spared much pain and misery from not learning that lesson at an earlier age. Do not murder, all right? And not to be confused with do not kill. The original King James translation incorrectly translated that word to kill. And of course, when you fight in the army and you are defending your country, you have to kill, okay? That's not a sin. All right, murdering is a sin, and so there's a big difference, and I want to spend a lot of time talking about that difference. But rule of law, again, is the key, is the context for that. We let the law determine who lives and who dies. If there is to be judgment or if there is a military to be sent out to fight a war, it's not up to us to take matters into our own hands to determine who lives and dies. All right? Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. God created a family in a very clear way with one woman and one man, and he said, find a spouse, marry that, make a covenant with them, stay with that spouse forever until death do you part. Right? Not complicated. Seems complicated in our world. Let me say this also. If you failed in one of those things, you are not any better or worse than anyone else who failed in any of these other things. All right? So don't feel like your life is over, your life is ruined because something went wrong in that plan, all right, or in your family. You should understand that God is making all things new. While we all live with the consequences of our sins, every single one of us, we live with those things or with our failures. We should know, though, that is how God created the family. That's how he created marriage. And so we should honor that covenant, and we should keep our eyes pure. All right? So that means if you are especially a married person, you keep your eyes on your wife or your husband, and you keep your eyes off of everyone else's wife and husband. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. If it's not yours, leave it alone. Do not give false testimony, against your neighbor. So in other words, don't lie. I find this one is also a particularly difficult rule for us as Christians. We have a hard time telling the truth. That's kind of sad because we should be the people that the world can rely on for the truth. And in fact, every time we lie and then we say, oh, I'm a Christian, I get not angry, but I become ashamed because if anybody should be telling the truth, it should be us, people that follow the Lord. And I find that oftentimes Christians are liars just as much as non-Christians. And so that's a problem. We need to change, and we need to be people of our word. If that means we have to be honest and confess what we did, we've got to be honest and confess what we did. I found it's a lot better to say, I'm sorry or I wish I wouldn't have done that, than to try to go through this whole list of reasons of why I did and why I'm justified. That's pride also mixed in with a false testimony. So we need to be honest people, and I know that's really hard, but that is what God asked his people, the Israelites, to do. That is what he is asking us to do. Do not covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox or donkey. Now I know that many of you are struggling with coveting your neighbor's donkey. And I want to just take a few moments to talk. No, I'm just kidding. All right, I think I'm actually the only person in this room that has a donkey. So, but here, let me clarify what that means. All right. At this time, everybody had an ox or a donkey. Okay, that's how you got work. That's kind of like a car, maybe. That might be a way to describe it. Maybe some tools. If you have some DeWalt tools or some Bosch tools, or some nice tools in the garage, or if you have a really nice refrigerator or furnace or hot water heater or water softener, well, I don't know, whatever it is, tools that you use that you should. When you go to someone's house and they have something you don't get mad and kick the ground and, oh man, I can't believe we don't have this and this and this. That's what started the whole keeping up with the Joneses nightmare, which is a loser game. All right, there is always going to be a Jones that has more than you do. All right, so you should just surrender to that and stop playing the game, because you will never win that. I guarantee you will not win that game. So we should just be happy with what we have. All right, that's the key. Don't try to, is it wrong to say, oh yeah, I'd like to have this, and I'm going to work hard, I'm going to strive for it, I'm going to be happy with what I have, but if God gives me more, hey, that's great. If he takes it away, I can live without it. All right, that's the right attitude. And it can become pride too, where we're like, oh, I shouldn't have anything, and someone tries to give you something, you're like, oh no, I can't take that because, so there's a balance there, but the goal is for us to be content with what we have, which, of course, coveting your neighbor's possessions leads you to what? Steal. Yeah, exactly. So they go together. And it says, all the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain surrounded by smoke. When the people saw it, they trembled and they stood at a distance. You speak to us and we will listen, they said to Moses. But don't let God speak to us or we will die. Okay, so at this point, the show has been pretty persuasive. All right, and they're watching this thunder and the fiery mountain, and I can imagine it's like Mount Vesuvius or somewhere, where if you were a Roman citizen or whatever, you're about to get, or in Naples, I guess, you're about to get made into molten lava. I'm sure it was a pretty terrifying experience. So they're thinking, okay, Moses, you speak to us. Don't let God speak to us because we're going to die. And so then Moses responds. He says, don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that you will fear him and you will not sin. And the people remained standing at a distance as Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And we're going to close with this thought before we go on to some of the additional laws that Moses was given. And then, of course, we're going to get to the golden calf, where all the people lose their minds and do incredibly stupid things. But I want us to not leave something. And in verse 20 and 21, it says, when Moses responded, he said, don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that you will fear him and not sin. I think there's a key here that oftentimes we overlook when we're talking about this particular story. And I think it's important for us to recognize and compare what Solomon said. He said that fear is the beginning of wisdom, is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of understanding, and not just fear, of course, but fear of the Lord. And what he means by that is that there is this understanding that truth comes from God, that the law comes from God. All right, it's not that we should get together in a little circle and decide what the laws are. Okay, that's communism, that's oligarchy. All right, that's not what the law is. But there is one law, is the understanding that it doesn't matter when you live, what civilization, whether you're black, white, yellow, brown, purple, whatever. Let's see, Vulcans have green blood, but I guess they're still pink skin. So, whatever you are, even if you're not of this earth, that there is a right and there is wrong. And it always was right and it always was wrong, and it will be right or wrong, and that never changes. All right, so that's this understanding that there is this immutable universal law, that right is wrong is wrong, and right isn't wrong and wrong isn't right, which I realize is very gray in our culture. But if we could step outside of that and step outside of all the things we hear and see on TV and listen to on the radio and understand that there is one law and that God is the author of that law, and we begin to ask questions, then hopefully, well, why is it that way? Why is there only one law? Why is it right? What's right for one person, right for another, and so on and so forth? And those questions bring us to this verse right here. Because the understanding, the honoring, the knowledge that God is who He says He is helps us to know where to begin. That He is the author of the law, and so when He gives us a law, it's just like the reason why the people couldn't come up the mountain, right? They're going to get killed. If you live a life of lying and stealing and murdering, you're going to have a problem, all right? It's going to end badly for you. So just as God gives us parents to say, don't touch that stove, don't go out with that person by yourself, don't attempt this without, don't attempt this project without having the right tools or knowing how to do it. Just like a good parent says those things, and maybe you didn't have a good parent, and I'm sorry for that if you didn't, but that's what a good parent does, is tells those things, and if you don't, if you think, hey, I'm a good parent because I let my kids do whatever they want, I'm going to challenge that and say, no, that's probably poor parenting. But a good parent does that. A good parent says, no, don't do this, stay away from that. That's what good parenting is. And I realize I just probably offended, most of the United States of America, but they're probably not going to watch this on YouTube anyway, so I won't lose too much sleep over that. But that is the truth. God says that we should fear Him so that we will not sin. And I want to close with this thought. It's more important to God to protect us from sin, from the harm that sin does, than for us to just be righteous robots. All right, I'm convinced that is the case. That for God, it's not all about Him giving us demands and we try to meet those demands. It's because God is the great protector. I mean, this whole time, what's He been doing? He's protected Noah in the flood. And He protected Noah's sons, and He protected and Isaac and Jacob, and all of that He protected, and He keeps protecting. And He's protecting us when He tells us to not misuse His name, to not murder, to not lie. He's protecting us. Let's pray. God, we thank You for the time that we had this afternoon, and we thank You that even though some things that were said today are hard to hear, we know, Lord, that You are the author of truth, and that how we are to live and what's right and wrong in this world, that comes from You, not from what's in our heart or what somebody else says. And I pray, Lord, that we would understand these things, that we would live by them, and that we would find blessing and peace and happiness and contentment by knowing who You are and by living in this way. And that we wouldn't feel deprived in some way or like we're part of some weird cult, that we would understand that this is just how the universal law is, how the world works, how the universe is. And so we pray, Lord, that You would open our eyes if we've not understood this till this point, that You would help us to see that. And God, we just pray that as we make choices, as we raise our children, as young people that are in this room become adults and they start their own families or careers or the work that You have for them, I pray that we would all do that with boldness. And we wouldn't be afraid of what might happen. We wouldn't worry or wonder if You're going to protect us or if You're going to be there for us, but that we would just trust You and understand that You are going to see us through all of those difficulties, all of those trials. And that You only ask one thing of us, and for us to be faithful, to follow after You, to let You be the leader, let You be the guide, that You sit in the throne seat of our life. And God, I just pray for all the people that we're going to interact with in the next 6 days, the people that we see at work or at school or maybe out in the house that lives catty corner from us. I pray, Lord, that we would be a light in the darkness of the world, and that through us You would steer our great nation, through us that You would steer our church, through us You would steer all of the decisions that we have to make in the correct direction that You want us to go. We just thank You and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being here.